And so, hi everyone. I'm Jeremy Lent, and I'm delighted to welcome you to another in our series of our Deep Transformation Network live interactive conversations. So here on the Deep Transformation Network, we're continually asking ourselves, as we should, like, what are the most skillful and effective ways to turn around this catastrophic trajectory that our civilization is hurtling on? So we have these kind of questions. Do we need more activism, getting people more back out on the streets? Do we need a clearer vision of what a life-affirming future might look like? Or do we need to catalyze change at a deeper layer of a sort of collective consciousness, like that shifts humanity's attention from competition to cooperation, or from exploitation to compassion? So today I'm honored and excited to be in conversation with someone who's really committing himself to that last strategy I just mentioned. Rick Hanson is here with me today. Hey, Rick, good to see you there. Rick is a celebrated psychologist and best-selling author, known around the world for his insights into how we can basically develop the internal tools for achieving greater well-being and compassion and wisdom. And recently, Rick, along with other global compassion luminaries, has been putting together a strategy to shift humanity's collective consciousness toward greater compassion, to basically help catalyze like a deeper change in the whole global system. So as a group, they've just launched an exciting new initiative, the Global Compassion Coalition. And they're bringing together a community, millions from around the globe, people who actually believe a compassionate future is possible and who want to collectively create a compelling force for change. So today we have the opportunity to find out from Rick all about this new coalition, the underlying ideas, the strategy, their theory of change, and basically what are the next steps they're doing right now in the launch. So I'll go, and the way we structure these is very similar. It's a 75-minute event today. Rick and I will be in conversation for the first half hour or so. In the second half, we're going to open it up to anybody to just basically ask questions of Rick or share their reflections with Rick. And so I'll ask you to put your hands up at the time. So be thinking about what you'd like to share. But if you'd like to ask something and you'd rather not be just be sort of seen publicly or talk in the public space, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll try to capture that, and I'll try to intersperse that with questions too later on. So Rick, welcome. Oh, and so we're hearing a little bit of audio feedback. So if everyone can make sure they're on mute as something's going on, that would be great. So thank you. So Rick, it's just so great to have you here with us today, and congratulations on the launch of this coalition. It's just amazing. And I'm interested, how's it been going so far? How's the launch been going?
Well, thank you. And first, let me just say, as I said before we began officially, I'm eager to learn more about deep transformation. Yeah. And in many ways, I may be the person who actually, learns the most here, which I'm always going for, and the person who learns the most wins, right, in general and in life, right? So that's one part. I mean it with a lot of respect. And with regard to the coalition, we'll say more about it, I'm sure. People can go to the website. I put it into the chat, globalcompassioncoalition.org. That'll explain it. We've been going in earnest for just 5 months, and wonderful, wonderful things have happened so far, including connecting with people like you, Jeremy, and your friends and colleagues here as well. So I would say it's going great. From time to time, as the person who thought he was going to retire this year and then suddenly has caught this tidal wave since, really it began with an idea I had some years ago, and then it really took life in February of 2022, and then we incorporated in June of 2022 and started, paying staff to get stuff done in September last year. And so we've really been at it for just 7 months. And sometimes I think about this ad, people can see it on YouTube, about herding cats. It's a very funny ad with cowboys in America herding cats. You never herd cats, so sometimes I feel like I'm coordinating cats at the upper bound of what's possible, and it's not always possible.
Absolutely. No, I know. And that's the interesting thing about humans, isn't it? Because on one way, we're very much like cats, where we've got our own thing. And at the same time, we're kind of like a little bit like a superorganism, a little bit like ants or bees or whatever. And that's both the like something that's terrifying and the potential that actually gets me quite excited sometimes about things like your coalition, that maybe it can be the kind of thing that can actually make that kind of that sort of phase transition that we need. So one thing I'd like to kind of start out with is just kind of maybe doing a little bit of grounding or context setting about compassion in general. Like, why do you see compassion itself as this kind of core human force that could potentially have such an incredible impact? And of course, in our society today, what we're told in our mainstream dominant culture is, well, compassion is very minor. Like basically humans are selfish and we're competitive, and that's what it's about. And of course, in my writings and your writings, both of us have tried to explain so much of this current research that shows the opposite is true. But perhaps you'd like to tell us about how you understand the role of compassion, basically as a core human driver and emotion.
Yeah. So compassion is this combination of empathy and benevolence. I'm just naturally putting my hand on the heart there, in which we feel for suffering, subtle suffering, agonizing suffering, daily stresses, weariness, a sense of things being unfair, because they are, sorrow, loss, illness, old age, disease, and death, suffering. And compassion is the response of the heart to it, to try to relieve it, which means by extension, changing the things that cause it, particularly when those things are indeed changeable. Aging and death inevitably will come to us all, me included, but there's so much that we can do something about. So that's feeling from the heart. Second, as context here, the older I get, I started meditating in 1974. The older I get, the more peaceful I get, and the madder I get. I'm getting madder and madder about injustice. It's that kind of cool, clear, fiery outrage that is mingled, that's on a base of equanimity, but is really real. And I've been reflecting more and more and more about what to do about it. And like you, people have different approaches on this. For me, the fundamental approach is to try to scale, building on your comment earlier about humans as a superorganism, in effect, as a single superorganism with many elements to it. To me, what I'm interested in is scaling at the whole human tribe, using that term very loosely. It's a little fraught, but the whole human species altogether, all 8 billion of us, to scale what worked in hunter-gatherer bands for 97% of the 300,000 years that people like you and me have walked the earth.
Yes.
Which research has shown was grounded in, unique among all primate species, was grounded in what's called caring and sharing, compassion and justice. Everyday life in hunter-gatherer bands was grounded in that way. And so the issue is how to restore it after 10,000 years of Game of Thrones, when agriculture came in with surpluses in populations and growing inequalities of wealth and power, hiring warriors and priests, to enforce their rule. And that's been the story of the last 10,000 years, more or less.
Yeah.
And so for me, to finish, the way to change it is to take a page out of our ancestors' book, take a page out of our DNA, grounded in compassion and justice as the foundation of living together, and create a frame in the 21st century of a new kind of global commons in which humanity can come together kind of in a new kind of global campfire, where we sit around the campfire, we look at each other, we see the suffering in each other, and we focus on the greater good, the common good, rather than get manipulated one more cycle by the interests of concentrated wealth and power. Yeah. So that's the vision here. That's the fundamental idea.
I just love it, Rick. I just can't even tell you.
All right. Good. I feel really touched, Jeremy, because you're a freaking all-star. I'm like, yay, Jeremy thinks it's cool. Woo!
No, I mean, seriously, you're saying about learning from a deep transformation network. I feel this is really what all of us here at the Deep Transformation Network, we're feeling exactly this whole thing. And I love that whole sort of potted history of human evolution, because I essentially, because I see it in just the same way. Like, we got that imbalance happened with the rise of agrarian civilizations, with the rise of hierarchies, and there's kind of ratcheting effect. Like, the big man then got to have all his cronies, like, get more weapons, and they got to conquer the more peaceful tribe next there, and put those values in place. And this is basically, it feels like our only opportunity is to kind of reorient and shift. And then that's the key question, is how do we do that? And there's so many millions of us around the world who actually have that sense of, it's as if the system that is causing the suffering is very centralized and dominant. And here are basically millions and millions of people around the world who don't want that. But it's like, how do we harness that? How do we cohere that in a way that can actually make that kind of transition happen? So in nomadic hunter-gatherer times, right, they developed these social technologies, right? They would either they'd kind of sing together to build harmony together, and then they'd do things like ridicule the big man or somebody who's trying to get too big for his britches, right? And then if that didn't work, they maybe would threaten him, or maybe even ostracize him as a kind of last resort. But then what are the ways in which we can develop our sort of global, I don't want to call them weapons because I don't like the sort of military metaphor, but where we can develop these global forces to make that happen. And so I so appreciate that you are trying to work on this. And one of my questions for you, I guess, as I'm thinking about this, is so many of us are looking at these networks of networks, right? When you start to explore, we just see network after network after network of people such as the DTN or such as a coalition, moving in a certain way to make things happen. How do we get to some sort of meta level of cohering it in a way that the networks naturally amplify the other networks? And so I'm just kind of curious, and because I think you're doing a lot of that through developing this coalition. So what's your sort of theory of change, if you will, as to how we can make that happen?
Well, that's great. We're co-enthusiasts here. So I just put into the chat a fundamental paper from Professor Paul Gilbert that summarizes a lot of what we've talked about, with tons of hardcore references that people can use as as aces in their hand that really substantiate what we're talking about. Well, so my opinion, as someone who's worked mainly at the individual level, so I'm definitely on a fast track of learning, hopefully, about how to do this at the collective level. It seems to me that we have to be, frankly, big enough to be strong enough. And the problem is that you basically see that the forces of wealth and power, they compete at their local level, at the marketplace level, but they cooperate intensively at the political corruption level. They put their money in a single bucket, and they are incredibly effective at it. I've seen that in my lifetime in America with the resurgence of the authoritarian right here, and we can see it elsewhere around the world. And so the unfortunate truth, though, is that most pro-social groups are the opposite. They're very friendly at the cocktail party level, or the like meet you for coffee level. They almost never put their money in a single common bucket at a scale that's big enough, or never collaborate or coalesce in a way that's big enough to be strong enough. And to get real, like as you probably well know, and could elaborate, in America, in the last 15 years, the oil and gas industry has spent $2 billion to prevent climate change legislation. They got what they paid for. How do you compete at that level? You have to scale up. You have to be big enough, to be strong enough to actually make a serious difference, So to me, you do it in stages. First, you build a substantial coalition worldwide grounded in compassion. Who can be against compassion? If you're against compassion, you're an asshole. You know what I mean? So, I'm being blunt, I hope it's okay. So you do that, and you focus, as we do, on study, education, application, and advocacy of compassion. You do, and you deliver value, you create collaborations, you celebrate your members, you grow. You do that. That's worth doing in its own right. But for me, if that's all we do by the end of the century, because that's the time frame I'm thinking in terms of big change by 2100, it'll be a great disappointment. But
Hmm.
then on that foundation, after stage one, stage two, you drive a really serious and effective, multi-year, well-funded influence campaign in culture and politics, promoting the values of compassion and justice in all kinds of ways that are culturally competent and sensible, but you just do that and you put the
Yeah.
money into it. You want to see some scary ads? Go to Texas and watch ads from the Texas Oil and Gas
Hmm.
Consortium. They're very effective and they're running on TV there all the time. Watch
Hmm.
Fox News. It's running there all the time. We need to do something different ourselves. And then building on that, for me, stage three
Hmm.
is to go after a flagship project that's worth doing in its own right, but which will necessarily force greater civil society in its wake. Because to me, that's my fundamental diagnosis. The problem is power. You know, power was used reasonably well and is used reasonably well in fairly small groups, you know, that are organized in this way. But at the world scale, it's power. Rich man's law, poor man's law, and all the rest of that. So you pick a flagship project, like imagine this. What would it take worldwide to make sure that no child dies of hunger ever, rather than the 10,000 kids a day?
Hmm.
Some while we're talking here
Yeah.
who will die due to hunger
Yeah.
related causes.
Yeah.
To do that, you've got to change food distribution systems, you have to expose corruption, you have to
Right.
drive a lot of stuff to accomplish that significant goal. Now, maybe there are others to choose. I mean, I
Hmm.
would really nominate decarbonizing, you know, as a major, major thing to do. But together, you come together at the scale, cross boundaries, cross
Hmm.
divisions. You know, it's a huge heterogeneous coalition with a lot of unlikely bedfellows that can agree on one thing: no more dead kids due to hunger, right? And a world that operates for the sake of the many, not just the few.
So here's where we get to
Thanks for
enter.
letting me rant.
No, no, thank. I love the strategy, and like in fact, when you were talking about this kind of phase three, I was kind of thinking, right, because actually I'm working right now on this kind of it's a book on this vision and theme of an ecological civilization, basically to envisage a civilization that is based rather than on the foundation of extraction and exploitation, that's actually
Beautiful.
based on setting the conditions for all humans to flourish on a regenerated earth, just like you're describing
Yeah.
that phase three. So I'm 100% aligned with you. But here's what I kind of want to explore also is that because as you started off with this totally appropriate phrase, who could be against compassion? And you've got to be a real asshole or a psychopath or whatever to actually not be, because that's our human evolved instinct. That's what
Yeah.
we are as human beings. It makes sense. And in a way, this whole dominant society, what they have to do is use media from infancy onwards to basically condition people, to drum out of them their core instinct for compassion and love and caring. So
Yeah.
totally with you on that. But then when you move into those stages 2 and 3 that you were describing, we get into these messy areas
Yeah.
where compassion meets politics
Yeah.
and power politics and the systems as they are right now. And so I'm imagining, like say I'm coming from, and as you know, like we've had an interaction of there's a question arises when you have institutions like say a McKinsey or a World Economic Forum or World Bank or whatever, who would any of the leading people there, I'm sure, if they were in this space right now, would say, absolutely, I'm all for compassion. I'm so glad that, and how can we support you? And perhaps we can write you a check for $1 million, and really get engaged with you. And maybe we can be on your sort of steering committee and help to make sure that compassion goes in the way we want it to go in, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is to do, and so this is where things get little difficult. So like imagine even we had that strategy of no child should be left hungry or starving in this day and age. So you and I, like we know, for example, that in fact, right now the world produces enough food for everybody on the earth to be
Yep.
fed fine. It's
Yep.
all about distribution. But how would you relate to somebody who goes, yes, I got it. And look at how the Green Revolution saved billions of people. And here's this new genetic modified, like extra next level revolution where we can do this and the other. How do you deal with, how do you get the big tent that actually gets that scaling we want while working through these issues of all the different groups who want to sort of greenwash, maybe I should say pinkwash, their what they're doing to be part of this process?
It's an incredibly important question. And one approach to it is to make sure that as our baby coalition, grows, that we include people like you, Jeremy, and other people who have a lot of experience in these areas, and including other kinds of experience building movements, and also are situated culturally in ways not like my own. I'm an American white middle class man who is a kind of clinical academic clinical, who teaches mindfulness, right? And there are cultures and people around the world that come from a very different perspective. Just even the contextualizing of the discourse is different. The feeling of the discourse is different. The energy of it, and also the presumptions are either way are different. We already have a pretty good amount of diversity in our board and advisory council, and
Mhm.
we're deeply committed to making it much, much better. So that's
Mhm.
part one, and including expertise about how to think through these really challenging issues. Um, Point one. Point two, I'm a longtime rock climber. I showed you the picture before we started.
Mhm.
Climbing, you have your feet in, I've taught a lot of people to climb. You have your feet in different positions, your hands are here. And a lot of people kind of freeze, they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
What you can do is step up on the foothold you've got, and then something new will come into reach as an
Mhm.
iterative kind of process. And so I
Mhm.
think, these are questions that we're going to need to really think hard about, particularly within a few years. But we know enough to do the next good thing. We know enough to do the next good thing. And second, just like our tribe, for me, that's the one thing I don't know many things, but that's the one thing I know well. I trust the tribe. I trust the band. I trust the gathering of good-hearted people
Yeah.
who whose fates are bound together and who feel it and have a moral commitment to each other and
Mm.
to the greater good. And I kind of trust, that will emerge. That said, I'm a pragmatist, my by nature, and I know I'm going to have one voice among many. My voice is to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Mhm.
You know, it's to appreciate that very, very different people can join on one thing, compassion, caring about suffering, and even can focus on basic policies that we do agree on quite readily, like obviously no kid should starve, uh, and then we'll just keep on going. But you're right, you're right. I
Yeah.
mean, what do we do with two groups, two people who are deeply committed out of compassion for families, and one group manifests that with deep commitment to the unborn child, and they're
Right.
against abortion.
Exactly. Exactly.
Another deeply committed to family welfare and all children, who's deeply
Yeah.
for the right to choose and body autonomy, which I
Exactly.
am.
Well, so
Yeah.
like
So how do we include all that?
that's
You're
an
right. It'll be
example.
a mess, but I
That's a
trust the
great
tribe.
example.
I trust the tribe.
Yeah. Do you actually have a do you have like a policy on that particular issue? Like if I come to you from an evangelical
Yeah.
community, say I totally believe in compassion, and so I hope you'll stand up for the unborn child. What would be your response to that?
Oh,
I'm curious.
it's so we've had to start thinking that through already.
Yeah.
From the standpoint of the nonprofit organization that is building and hosting a new kind of global commons.
Right. Hmm.
For that nonprofit organization to take specific positions is
Yeah.
something that has to be done carefully.
Hmm.
On the other hand, the coalition that's wildly diverse and heterogeneous by design and massively inclusive and sorts millions of people and organizations
Yeah.
worldwide. Um, Inside that will be many, many different views. And, you know, I like that.
Hmm.
Maybe because I come out of California and I'm an aging hippie, I just kind of, I just have a certain feeling for let a creative ferment unfold. But while meanwhile being very careful and thoughtful about positions that the nonprofit organization itself takes and being really thoughtful
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes real good sense because, of course, the nonprofit can lose its status if it
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
stands for position. And have you thought through things like like street protests when you have people like the Extinction Rebellion or
Oh,
the would you want to sort of get behind that and have somebody from, say, the Global Compassion Coalition or like maybe a group marching with them saying this is what we stand for, or again you want to keep it a little less politicized? I'm just curious as your
yeah.
how you
So I'm the founder. I have a certain weight, but really I'm one person banging a drum. And so other people, yeah, we have, we vote on our board by majority. And so that
yes.
that said, um, my own opinion is to start by being very inclusive, very inviting, deliver value to our members, create opportunities for people to, form community with each other. There are millions of people and organizations around the world that are doing wonderful things they don't know about each other. And
Yes,
to encourage,
right. Mhm.
celebrating and collaborating forms of synergy, just among ourselves, that itself would be historic.
Mhm.
Let's do that for a while and get that right. And meanwhile, be kind of thoughtful about, frankly, not being immediately identified with one ism or another.
Right.
Being humble,
Yeah.
being a learning organization, being an organization that learns from the incredible diversity of wisdom in this world.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
and takes time. That's the other thing I think. For me, like I said, big change by 2100. That's my window. Yeah, it'd be great to have big change next year. Good luck with that, you know.
Mhm.
But what can we accomplish by the end of the century if we're brave and
Yeah.
we quit arguing with each other and start focusing on what we have in common and go after, big targets and have the courage to do that. That
Yeah.
I don't
And
know, but I'm a baby at this.
yeah,
I'm here to
well, I
learn.
feel what you're saying makes so much sense. And yeah, and then sometimes when we're looking at the at where things are unfolding, we might even ask, well, do we even have until the end
Yeah,
of the century? Will there even be a civilization
yeah,
by the end of the century at this rate?
yeah,
And so there's always that sense of the urgency, along with that sense of the deep transformation that's actually needed. That even under the most aggressive scenarios, on those things don't happen in years; they happen over
yeah,
decades or whatever, even at the best case.
yeah. If
And
I could add something
yeah, yeah,
really,
sure,
one
absolutely.
of one of our functions as a coalition is to support and nourish and seed other coalitions to form, and that's starting to happen in very beginning steps. And so and to be also kind of a hub of best practices for
Hmm.
the formation
Hmm.
of effective coalitions. I think back on my youth. I kind of came of age in the mid 60s, became aware as a teenager what was happening, Mr. Jones around here, to quote Bob Dylan,
Yes.
civil rights, gay rights, women's rights, environmentalism, multiculturalism, the infusion of Eastern wisdom into the West, normalization of psychotherapy, major developments in the 60s and 70s that then, I've seen that happen because a vast coalition came together, right? So I think that's a really important thing to do.
Yes.
Along the way, right now today, I don't know if you've read Yuval Harari's what is it, 2% of GDP for 1.5 degrees Celsius, his New York
Hmm.
Times piece he did.
Hmm.
It's really worth seeing. The real question is, right now today, why don't, why doesn't an effective coalition form of all the groups around the world who are deeply committed to capping climate catastrophe?
Hmm.
Like, why don't they form
Yeah.
a coalition around the obvious low-hanging fruit that's right on the table and get effective about it and intense about it? Like,
Hmm.
that's right there to do. You just see
Yeah.
again and again. on the left, especially progressives, tend to not form effective coalitions with each other. And to me, I'd love to see that change.
Yeah, I mean, I so agree with you about the effective coalition that we need. And there's always this question, how does it be most effective? Oh, by the way, before I say anything more, just wanted to say I'm looking at the time, and in a moment, I want to open this up to everybody joining in this conversation. So right now, I invite anybody who feels they'd like to share anything, ask a question or whatever, go to the Zoom reaction, put your Zoom hand up. And I'm trying to keep track of questions on the chat. If anybody of our Zoom hosters want to put that in our WhatsApp app, that would be great. So I could try to keep track on that. Otherwise, I'll just try to see what I can catch. But do, as long as you're okay with a sort of being more public, do put your hand up so we can also have your face and voice in our conversation. But anyway, my point, I guess, is around how can we be the most effective? And there's always also this question about top-down and setting the conditions. Like if we think of transformation as we're basically self-organized processes, then to what degree is it like setting the conditions for the change and then letting all of the different networks work together? But I'm such a believer with you, Rick, that it's setting those conditions means getting those sort of overarching narratives that everyone can actually be behind. That's so like when I look at, for me, the thing that gets me so excited, this vision of an ecological civilization, similar to you, it's like setting the conditions for a life-affirming civilization. How could anybody be against that? And actually, when we look at the most effective movement for change, I think that happened in the last century, it was basically the Mont Pelerin Society that set up the whole process of neoliberalism, starting from the 40s through the 60s, 70s, or whatever. They did something similar. They had this. They suggested individual liberty should be
from the right. Yeah,
exactly from the right should be the one thing that, and so lots of people would join in the movement from all kinds of different ways of life because they all believed liberty, individual liberty. That's what I believe in. So I feel that's what we need to do, and that's why I'm so supportive of what you're doing. I see tons of hands up now, so let me actually shut up for myself. I could keep going nonstop because this topic gets me so.
Yeah, God, this is great. Super fun.
Yeah, but let's turn to Nancy, who's the first person with your hand up there. Welcome, Nancy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for an excellent topic and raising all the right issues. I just wanted to share, you may well be familiar with this already, that what the XR movement, Rupert Reed and others have shifted into what they're currently calling the climate majority project that is launching on May 9th. And I'm an American, but I've been working closely with them and behind the scenes trying to connect what they're doing with the Deep Transformation Network, and really excited to pass this on to some of the leadership there. And it's one of the many places I feel the movement is organic. And over the years, it shifts almost every 6 months. It changes in character. And we are at that tipping point for exactly the sorts of things you're talking about today. So thanks for the clarity of your guidance with it.
Thank you. And thank you for helping me learn more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Nancy. And if you want to put any links,
I'll put it in the chat.
That would be fantastic. So people can connect with you there. Thank you. And I think, Katie, I think you're next. Hey there, Katie.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you both. This is pivotal conversation, profoundly important. Excuse me. So I'm a psychotherapist, and I've been doing a lot of in-depth thinking and writing about how to parallel what I see in my office, which is a lot of repair and reconciliation and this kind of wonderful work, transformative. How to duplicate that or create a parallel in the larger sphere, which we know is full of combat and fighting and starvation, etc. I'm concerned that an intention to create compassion in a movement may not be enough, because humans do have lots of triggers. And eventually we end up fragmenting and destroying whatever movement we're in my opinion. How would you address that? And would that be maybe back to what you were saying about setting conditions in these coalitions so that we can work through conflict, or that there is a mission statement there?
I think that's beautiful. And like you, I'm a therapist. And as you'll see in the Paul Gilbert paper, he really foregrounds also, what just the capacity in the human species, running a lot, frankly, through males toward callousness and cruelty. And I think about our vulnerability to being triggered as hunter-gatherers toward high sweet carbohydrates, because you couldn't store food back in the Serengeti plains, so we gorge. And we're vulnerable in much the same way to the powerful appeals from authoritarian leaders for grievance against the dirty, contaminating, evil other. So we're very vulnerable there. Exactly right. And I do observe that new forms are being created around how effective coalitions can have a kind of infrastructure. I do think, just to finish, that I'm quite hopeful. Maybe as a guy who read way too much science fiction as a teenager, I'm hopeful about the World Wide Web. We have people didn't have the kind of chance that we have today to wrest power from privilege and make a better world for all of us. But we do have that chance. We may not succeed at it, but we have a chance. That's everything right there. And part of it is to recreate using online forms and other forms that are more immediate, skin to skin, eye to eye. That's how we evolved. But how do we do it right now on Zoom with 130 other people? To look at what I call the cellular structure of civil society. As governments break down, as systems break down, as we move into ecological, distress, if not collapse, it's that underlying cellular structure, which again, historically has been mainly driven by women and people who identify as women, the unpaid labor, right, in so many ways. But wherever it comes from, that cellular structure. So I've thought a lot about how do we create that online by creating forms with just a little bit of ground rules, and like you said, a little bit of framing and training, that 3 perfect strangers or 13 perfect strangers could connect online for a heartfelt conversation about something important, and then build from there with repetition. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very validating, those ground rules. Thanks.
Yeah, love that. And let me just actually make just mention of someone who's partnering with the Deep Transformation Network a fair amount, David Sloan Wilson, Pro-Social Commons, who's doing kind of something very similar to what you're describing. So if you're not already engaging with David,
I'm talking with him, I think, next week.
Fantastic, because
thank you.
I love that. And one similarly, talking about just a question that actually came in on chat, again talking about relationships. Are you working with Karen Armstrong's Charter for Compassion?
So okay, the charter is an early model, and so our aim is to form a commons in which many organizations, the Charter for Compassion, Action for Happiness, Pro-Social World, Deep Transformation Network, the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, kind of my home affiliation, blah, blah, can be part of it. They were very supportive, and several of their key people are on our board. We're very close with the charter.
Excellent.
Karen's work was groundbreaking.
Really fantastic.
It's in a religious framework, basically, in its roots. The GCC is more secular, or it's inviting. It encompasses religious groups. Charter's great.
Okay, great. Thanks for answering that, Rick. And let us turn to Robin. Really great to see you, Robin. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Robin. Good to see you again.
Yeah, hi, Rick. How are you?
Good.
Nice meeting you, Jeremy. Very fascinating conversation. I'm listening to it. It's not something that I hear about it, but it helped me to know as a deaf woman who is the quote culture and then deaf culture, hearing culture. Did you know that deaf and hearing culture have an enormous, huge information gap over 10 decades, and nobody fixed it? And that's how I end up with the breast cancer. But that's okay. And I have passion to create a cross-cultural relationship at stage 1. Stage 2, cross-cultural community. Stage 2. Stage 3, cross-cultural business. Stage 3, in America and global. Now, when I heard Rick talking about politics, in my mind, my opinion, but this one, they love to create drama, politics, Republican, Democrat, and I see them, they are troublemakers that cause people that have emotional problems, trauma, all kind of things. And they also is their politics and hearing politics. It's toxic relationship. Oh my God. And that's why I'm passionate to help Rick, GCC. I'm one of the founders of his program, for the program. And I'm going to create a video, but I could use some help to make sure it makes sense because I'm new in compassion and self-compassion. I don't know if you're going to do both for this event on April 15th. Rick, are you? I'm not sure. Are you doing self-compassion or only compassion for April 15th, the event?
Oh, I think both. We are having for everyone a major launch event on April 15th. You're all invited. It's free. It's awesome. And you can go to the website that I put in the chat. Maybe somebody else could put it in again for me, globalcompassioncoalition.org. So that's what Robin's talking about. Yeah. Thank you,
Yes.
Robin. Yeah.
Yeah. And so is that going to be your...
Oh, so one more
Sorry.
thing.
Yeah.
Another thing is that the woman before me, I think she's a therapist. I don't know her name. She would talk about trauma. Did you know that deaf people are not allowed to learn sign language when they were baby? We were forced to speak. That part of politics with money. We were economic exploitation. And sign language is a human right. So can you, I'd like to somehow to put that awareness out there, how I do that. Do the live with the video? I'm not sure. Maybe Rick can help me. One of the team can help me prepare the script when I create a video for your event.
Please email Matt Hawkins about that, Robin. I've seen your emails about that. I know we're going to move on here, but please email Matt.
Great.
And copy me. You have my email address also, okay?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Robin. Really great having you connect with us here. But perhaps actually, Rick, we can have you just talk a little bit more for a moment about this launch event that you've got coming, you say mid-April. It sounds like is that like the big launch, if you will, like the sort of hard launch as opposed to the soft launch kind of thing, or? Yeah,
and again, just Robin, I know you can still see what is being said here. Really, please do email me again about this, and please do include Matt Hawkins on that, who's our Chief Communications Officer and in charge of things. And it's a really important thing. For me, I think a lot about how important it is. What's the heart of compassion? It's that we each matter, right? The person next to us matters, and the person in the mirror matters. And that's just super important. It's foundational. Meanwhile, we need to get stuff done, right?
Exactly.
With the spirit that each of us matters. So thank you. On April 15th, we're doing a big fancy event. I hope all of you register for it. It's free. It'll be great. We've been launching really since February of 2022. We really came out of the box in September. And so it's kind of an ongoing launch. But this is our kind of formal, hello, we're here party.
And perhaps what we can do is put an event on the feed of the Deep Transformation Network where we have events upcoming, so then easier for people to remember and sign up for that. So let's turn to Andrew. Andrew's joining us from Australia, right, Andrew?
Blue Mountains, yes, Jeremy. I want to extend the ideas a little bit. compassion. A more general phrase for that comes around Eisler, partnership respect. Foundational for a healthy future, compassion, love, caring. The other foundation, of course, is ecological sustainability. So we have two wings. And to my mind, the phrase that unifies all of that is the one that Jeremy uses often, a life-affirming culture. So I have a vision that the way for the multitude of groups to align is to embrace that as an overarching goal. And then beyond that, to reach out to their members and inspire people. This is my big theme. Inspire people to be citizen educators. And on the technical side, we can teach about whole system change. How do we change the institutions that drive climate? But on the psychological side, we can give people tools, literally, there are tools we can easily teach people to resolve their own emotional issues.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know from internal family systems therapy or meditation or whatever, when we resolve our issues, our native compassion, caring, and courage comes up. It's just part of us.
Yeah.
So,
So do you have a question for Rick, Andrew? Because Andrew has a group actually on the DTN, which is all about exactly what you're describing. I so appreciate the work you're doing on that, Andrew. Do you have any particular question for Rick?
I would love to have a chance to either join your board or talk with you or somebody about a slightly different strategy that I'm articulating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Please reach out, either just through the contact form on the GCC website or on my personal website, and I'll definitely remember who you are, and that'll be a very good one. So thanks, Andrew.
Yeah. Thank you for all the work you do, Andrew. Really important stuff. And over to Jeffrey, if you want to join us in the spotlight. Hey, Jeffrey.
Hello, Jeremy, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be here, and again, so grateful to have you guys do what you're doing. I want to speak about a possibility of bringing this emerging collaborations into a bigger context to empower all of you leaders that wants to bring us together and transforming, and let's say moving into the next level of civilization, from extraction to ecological, from regenerative. I just want you to imagine 100 of you at the level that you are in the world coming together and adopting the us humanity perspective. So there is a shift from we and them, or we leaders, you followers, to us humanity, amongst the most influential leaders of these types of movements. And that produces a shift in perspective that creates a new mindset and delivers a new context, which is the kind of context that I trust we will need to begin to align everyone's efforts, converge, and create the synergies necessary to accelerate the transformations. And this is a project that I'm putting together that I've been really looking for the opportunity to present to you, Jeremy, what Pro-Social is doing exactly along the lines, what you did in the last week with trying to merge the communities.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's do that, not at a global scale, but at the us humanity scale.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a transformation from within, because this is what my study says. When we take the same perspective, we will perceive the same reality.
Beautiful.
Well, that separation that we have been suffering, there is an existential root, which your books speak about. And I think that at the core, that separation is simply because we do not have a worldview that explains the spiritual to material interconnection. We don't have it. Yeah, science,
Love
religion.
what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
So
Jeff.
we need,
That's so
we
great.
need,
Mm.
in order for us to see the wholeness, we have to experience our oneness.
Yeah.
And that is what you can experience when we all convert into the Ozymandian perspective.
And I'm curious, Rick, if I think you've written a lot about exactly what Jeffrey is describing, if I'm not mistaken. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that deep insight from Jeffrey?
So I, as a person in my practice and my view, clearly there's an interdependence, co-arising, oneness frame. What it seems to me is that when I look at the world and what has led to productive change, because that's what I'm really caring about. The older I get, the calmer I get, the madder I get. I want to see productive change, beneficial change. And frankly, I see a lot of ineffectual, I call it aspirational ineffectuality among progressive pro-social groups, in which they're great at generating slogans and banners and white papers and manifestos and petitions and calls to action. And they're just treading water. The conditions that they're trying to change are staying the same. And as a longtime clinician, first and foremost, you have to acknowledge when your treatment's not working, right? When the plan's not working. So I'm really interested in what's actually effective. And it does seem to me that what's effective happens in two ways particularly, and sometimes a third. And I'm very open to correction because I'm a baby here about this. One, a slow cultural shift. Think about the complete shift in certainly the many parts of the world around gay marriages, or just the shift around how people should not be beaten or kids should not be hit, stuff like that. It's just a shift in the consciousness. Cultural shift does make a difference. It's slow though, but it's incredibly important and it's foundational. So I think what you're talking about, Jeffrey, is the absolute foundation. It's that cultural shift. But meanwhile, also what seems to happen is that an effective coalition forms that exercises power. Whether it's, as you said, Jeremy, in the streets. I went out into the streets, during the 60s and during the 70s. I'm for that. And exercises power. With elections, with money, it doesn't fool around. It gets stuff done. And then once in a while, something comes along that's good. In which typically there's some kind of technological shift that actually does make the world a lot better for a lot of people. So anyway, that's how I would kind of think about it. Yeah. And how can we have all those parts fit together and learn from people who understand so much more than I do about how to get something big done at scale.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you, Jeffrey, for that insight. And over to Chuck. You want to join us, Chuck, and we can connect with you. There you go. Hey, Chuck.
Thank
and we
you.
have to get you off mute. Yeah, you're on. Okay.
Thank you. And you can hear me, okay, right?
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thanks for what I've heard here today. It's really inspiring and really has stimulated my thinking. From speaking from my own perspective, one of the things that I have done in the past 30 years is realize that if I confine my compassion to my fellow humans, what I'm neglecting is a compassion for the rest of life, to put it simply, and particularly the other species. A lot of my training and experiences in the field of ecology and working with systems and systems thinking. And in my work with other species, which is fairly extensive, I just have a compassion for them, where I recognize that my compassion for my fellow humans can often be in direct conflict with that. And so in terms of generating a kind of question here, I guess what I'm headed towards has to do with how much have you paid attention to the work of Gregory Bateson and Thomas Berry in terms of their concern about the other species and the way our species interact and so forth, and especially from a systemic point of view. The foundations that they have provided have led me to looking at other species as role models for how to be a species. And it draws upon the medical forerunner here of normative information, where we understand that a body temperature of 104 degrees Fahrenheit is abnormal and something and problematic.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And when we compare ourselves to other species as role models, where we can use those species in the patterns that they present to us as holistic information about what works in nature. I liked, Rick, your initial comments about thinking in terms of what the words I will use is genetic blueprint for how to be. These other species have genetic blueprints that they've endured for hundreds of thousands of years, and so they
great point, Chuck. Yeah, thanks. So, and it sounds like the question for Rick that I feel I'm seeing so many comments on the chat supporting where you're coming from, Chuck. So thank you. You've really given voice to this. Is how does this global compassion coalition extend to those who are non-humans, to all sentient beings, if you will? So
that's a great
Rick,
way of posing it in forms of a question and expanding. I'll call it expanding your paradigm, because you've got a paradigm working, you've got a perspective working that is really focused very nicely at the human level.
So should we hear from Rick now in terms of his thoughts on that? Yeah.
Like others in the chat, I really appreciate what you're saying. And for me, it's in two ways. One is situating humaning our species individually and collectively, humaning in absolutely the foundational frame of the ecosphere altogether. And as a detail, my dad was a population ecologist, and so he was a professor of zoology at Cal State LA, and so ecology is kind of in my blood, and I'm someone who just loves the wild as well. So first of all, any kind of sustainable peacefulness and prosperity for humanity altogether requires completely shifting out of our exploitative, and Jeremy's much more articulate about this than I am, framing, of extraction and exploitation and domination, patriarchy. And so that's number one. And number two, I totally am with you there. We actually are moving in the direction of bringing in more of a focus on non-human animals, because we're obviously animals too, and the implications of compassion for them. And, as you probably know as well, there's a lot of new research that just really emphasizes, the sentience of non-human animals. And I read a paper a couple of years ago about basically the neurochemical architecture inside crawfish and thus shrimp that experience fear. That's very homologous, very similar to that in human beings. And you know what I mean?
Totally.
You're like, that really brought it home, and just, whoa. So just stuff, I'm with you. I'm very much with you. What you're bringing up is extremely important.
And in fact, if you give MDMA to an octopus, they'll get cuddly, even though they're the most antisocial species. Other than that, it's just amazing. But and one idea just to put out there for you to think about is something organizations are beginning to consider doing is actually to bring somebody on your board to represent all sentient beings, non-human sentient beings, as a representative of that, just as an idea. But I'm looking at the line of people who also have questions and noticing we just have 15 minutes left. So let's make sure we try to have compassion for everyone else who's got there, who's been waiting patiently. Let's turn to Diana. Diana, you want to join? I saw you've been very patient. Thank you. Let's get you off mute, Diana.
I muted myself. Hi. I'm feeling like compassion for me is about having a future. I think, what am I going to tell my grandkids if things, as they grow up and look around, and it just feels so heartless. And I often wonder how that happens. And I had this idea about, I think so many of us feel this way, but we feel isolated. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat to get people out on the street together, I don't know, maybe once a month or something, and have it kind of be like, I know where I live in Nelson, the Pride Parade is a big deal. It's just people are colorful and they have fun and sort of like that, and Burning Man and just, so there's food. So if you're a hungry person, you can just come and eat, and singing songs and just, having it the place to be so that people don't have to be online and they can be empowered and emboldened to exercise their compassion and, just see where it goes, right? But have it a very sort of, I don't know, loving, compassionate thing on the streets. Anyways, I just feel as though people could feel so affirmed and maybe be empowered to, see that other people are there and caring. And anyways, I'm just wondering what you think of that idea, Rick. And thank you so much. I just love the idea of compassion and for doing this, Jeremy. It's great.
Well, that's a beautiful idea. And, I'm someone who consumes a lot of fiction one way or another, reading, watching. My wife and I watch a lot of B plus TV, and, it's fun, an hour or two a night. And I'm just so stunned by how little compassion there is in most shows. That's why a show like Ted Lasso has just sort of blown up, because it's such an exception to the rule, and I think the real change happens in culture. And being a demonstration of compassion and action, which sometimes has a certain force to it. We need much more of that. And things are starting to happen. It's interesting. There are shifts where shifts can occur, in which, as a matter of policy, like apparently in the UK, they passed a law about new laws that said that all new laws need to have a kind of a vulnerability impact report, like an environmental impact report, to acknowledge the impact of the new law on the more vulnerable people in society. Now, it's human animals only, it's not human yet, but things like that. So you can just start to see things are moving in that direction. Like, what do we take into account? Right? I think about Ta-Nehisi Coates' definition of privilege as what you don't have to take into account.
Yeah.
There's more to it than that, of course, but what do we leave out? The Zen saying, nothing left out, but we always leave out. So we need to not leave out that we tend to leave out. And a guy like me really needs to pay attention to what he doesn't have to take into account, that lots and lots of other people have to take into account.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Rick. Yeah. And thank you for that great idea, Diana.
Yeah, thank you,
And
Diana.
and let's turn to Elena. Elena, you want to join us? Hey there. Great to see you. And you're still on mute, Elena.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy I got a turn to talk. So I'm very new about this. I don't want to sound in these conversations, I don't want to sound disrespectful, but in my research, I'm looking for ways in which we can make all of these conversations, talks, awakenings of the consciousness, sharing compassion and gratitude with people that are not really familiar with the concepts. How can we make these ideas more inclusive? How can we support people to introspect, and what does that mean? And how can we make it actionable and easy? So I wonder if there's anything that you can share, because there's a certain group of people where these ideas resonate immediately, but there's also a big group of people that they don't really know where to begin. And sometimes I feel that the narrative is so complex that it's also intimidated for those who have never actually done it. So without aiming at oversimplification, I think that it can be, it's also beautiful in its simplicity. And so I just wonder if you have any views on that. Yeah.
I have a lot of views, but only some of them are good. What I mean is, it goes back to what I said about culture. So I'll tell you two quick stories, or one quick story, really. I met some people at a conference many years ago, and I found out that what they do, it's a husband and wife team, is that they create soap operas in developing countries around the world, in most cases organized around a soccer team, a football team, although in Pakistan, they did it around a cricket team. And they use these soap operas, which are produced very inexpensively with local people in the language of that culture, to tell stories that build in messages about basically compassion and justice, like basic stuff, like men do not hit women. But when you have a soccer star in the soap opera who's making that point, not like someone preaching, but in a way that's very persuasive, it actually can be quite influential.
Yeah.
And so I find myself thinking about, at scale, what if we had $1 billion a year, year after year after year? There are a lot of people in the world. 8 men have as much wealth today as 4 billion people, right? And some of them are benevolent, many of them are not, So my point is, if you had a budget like that, how would you spend it? How would you spend it on TikTok videos and reaching out to people around the world in ways that would be effective, that would be culturally situated in different cultures, but would be really fundamental, like other people matter, you matter, we matter, we're in it together. We need to think about what's good for all of us together. We're being bullshitted by all kinds of people in power. We've been lied to. We've been bullied. We've had it. My feeling is that there's a broad global feeling, including among young people, who've just had it. They've had it with the status quo. They've had it with, I hate that the word liberal is in neoliberalism. This is like post-industrial capital fascism. There's nothing liberal about it.
Exactly.
And so anyway, so I just want, how do we tap into that feeling of being fed up? And I think a lot of that will be through culture. And people who are more clever than I will figure out how to do that.
Love all those ideas. Those soap operas, some of the most important shifting of culture that we see.
And
I
myths
love
and new stories.
Yeah, exactly. New stories.
Compassion heroes. So,
and I love how you're thinking big, Rick.
oh yeah, can I tell you 2 more big
I'm with
ideas?
you on that. That's
But
what
I
we-
love you guys. So really fast. So part of it is, so to me, there's a dimension of practice and a dimension of ethics. So practice in 2 ways: what you do inside yourself and what you do in the world. So I imagine it would be wonderful to ask people, what is that pledge if a critical mass of human beings took it and lived from it, or tried sincerely to live from it each day? What is that pledge that could change the course of history? And there's no right answer. I'll tell you my nomination, though. It's that I pledge to tell the truth, play fair, and have compassion.
I love that.
Hard to argue with that. Now, maybe there's a different one for a different person. So that's one. What's the pledge?
I
And
wonder
then
if
you start to
somebody can put
identify.
that in the chat.
Yeah, that others have
Wait,
taken.
do you just want to repeat that again so somebody can put that in the chat?
I pledge to tell the truth, play fair, and have compassion, or be fair. But just really it. Truth telling and fairness are the foundations of any kind of healthy relationship, on top of which have compassion, including for yourself. Or different. What practice? What if a critical mass of people, 1 billion people a day, committed to doing something for 5 minutes? Inner or outer? What's that practice that if 1 billion people did it every day for 5 minutes would change the world? Now, there's no one right answer. There are different answers. Maybe one person would say, I'm going to spend 5 minutes a day cultivating compassion. Another person would say, I'm going to spend 5 minutes a day giving over to Christ consciousness. Okay? I asked Joseph Goldstein, a great meditation teacher in America, what his answer was. And he said, I suggest that people spend 5 minutes a day listening to another person with no agenda. Okay? So these 2 questions: what's your pledge? What's your practice? And to think about doing that at scale.
Profound, beautiful. Yeah, this is such great mind expanding stuff. Thank you, Rick, and thank you for that great question, Aina. And over to Guy. Guy, you want to join us, and just obviously you have to be a little quick. We're running out of time. Just want to say, great to see you here, Guy. Guy has written about ecological civilization, written great stuff that is really meaningful work for me, and I appreciate it. So, hey, Guy.
So thanks, Jeremy. I'm up here in Canada on Vancouver Island, Rick, and going back to in the animal realm, we know that power and hierarchy and domination are pretty omnipresent. Among the hunter-gatherers, they managed for 300,000 years, as you said, to suppress self-importance and the impulse to dominate. So tribalism trumps compassion. So the data shows that around 70 to 75% of people want to live by compassionate values. 25% want to live by values of self-importance and power. And when we don't address the power dimension, we end up being in a good kumbaya and missing the story entirely. So this recent book by Naomi Oreskes is The Big Myth, subtitled How American Business Taught Us to Loathe the Government and Love the Free Market, shows that it wasn't just the Mount Pelerin Society. There was 90 years of highly financed propaganda to make Americans in particular hate the government. And out of that hating the government and the failure of regulations, you got the mess you have today. For contrast, here in Canada, our minister, our federal minister of environment and climate, is a Greenpeace climate activist who's been arrested in the past for climbing the CN Tower. And he's doing the very best he can in struggle with the oil corporations in Alberta, who are following a very selfish agenda of power and politics and stuff like that. And the question to you is, do you think that really you're going to persuade people by saying that our 100-year goal is to get this stuff happening, when the younger generation are utterly freaked out by what's happening in the next 2 years? And the entire climate movement I'm part of, we know that the next 10 to 15 years are the absolute critical time. And there is already a global climate movement, but it's complex. You have to dive in and know what it's all about. But if I heard someone saying in 100 years' time, I'd say, yeah, well, that's not going to tackle our crisis is really now. Anyway, over to you for that.
Yeah, your point's super well taken. It's not a strong official position of the GCC. The idea of big change by 2100. Obviously, we need big change sooner. And I'm 100% for that. Question is how to accomplish that. And I'm all for that. And I understand the moral hazard you just are pointing out to me, that people could be complacent to think about longer. For me, both are true. I can hold an intense sense of urgency, while on the other hand, recognizing that I think the 21st century will arise, or the 22nd century rather will arrive. How's it going to be then? And to aim for it. But I take your point. It's a very good one. And I'll keep it quiet about 2100. Yeah. And you're totally right. The primal strategy of holding control, alpha dominance, was unleashed against other tribes, and then you're right. Within the band, the conditions constrained us because you'll find some essays from me on our GCC website very briefly. When there's common truth, common welfare, and common justice baked into the fabric of daily life, that regulates our worst tendencies and creates a space in which compassion and justice can be foundational. Common truth, common welfare, common justice, when 50, 40 people live together most of their lives.
But I have to share the common sharing of wealth. It wasn't this food surplus that allowed domination out of the box. It was inheritance. When the more prosperous people insisted their children could inherit their wealth, and then
But in hunter-gatherer bands, these objective conditions, how do you have those? How do we restore the objective conditions in daily life of common truth, common welfare, and common justice? To me, that's very foundational, and it's a huge problem. How do you scale that? When you have groups of more than 40 or 50 people, and how do you scale it to 8 billion people? That's a deep inquiry.
I think that's the key thing, Rick. And it seems to me that's exactly what you're trying to do with the GCC. And what I think all of us are trying to sort of do in our different networks and it's like we want that thing to coalesce. So I so appreciate. I'm looking at the time.
Y'all are great. This is like freaking great. I was like, what was this going to be like?
So many questions. And I just want to acknowledge Ray, Larissa, Jim, Michael, and Jeffrey. we're not going to get to your questions live right now because we do have this this time constraint. But what I'd like to suggest you do, if you want to just type the question into the chat right now, I'll upload this on the DTN network, and I can copy and paste your question there, and then I can invite Rick if he wants to maybe just respond to the question there. So even if you won't get the question answered in real time, you'll be able to engage with Rick within the next 24, 48 hours or so on that. So my apologies. We just had too many incredible ideas and perspectives and questions to meet our time. And just before we go, well, let me first off, just thank you, Rick, for everything, for just the time you spent generously with us today, for what you're doing. And above all, I just want to thank you for sitting there on that mat, feeling the equanimity and getting madder, because that's what we all need to do. And that's what the journey I've been on myself the last few years. And thank you for getting that feeling and doing something about it. That's the way I feel we are going to make the change happen. That seems almost impossible, but not quite.
Yeah.
And so it's just great. Whatever we can do to support you here on the DTN, ways in which we can work together, invite you to consider and creating a group on the DTN so that people can naturally, as they join the DTN, can find out about your group and get involved. Total open invitation to do that.
Thank you. Vice versa. Yeah,
fantastic to have you here. So big appreciation, Rick. And I just want to say before we all go, don't miss we're going to be meeting again live. Actually, same time, same channel next week on Tuesday at 1 p.m. We're going to have our next monthly DTN live meeting. And one of the most important steps I feel that we need to do to move towards a more compassionate society, the way that Rick's been talking about, is to transition away from shareholder-owned corporations and towards employee-owned cooperatives. And the most famous and successful example of that in the world is the Mondragon Cooperative in the Basque region of Spain. And next week, we'll be doing a deep dive into cooperatives with an expert panel featuring Georgia Kelly, who's one of the world's leading experts on Mondragon and has just written a paper about them. And we'll also be joined by Tim Hewitt, an attorney who specializes in designing cooperatives. He's been doing it for 20 years, helped establish the Arizmendi Co-op here in the Bay Area. So really important discussion. Don't miss it. See you then. And apologies again to those of you who didn't quite get a chance to ask a question live. Please make sure to, if you haven't already done it, put in the chat. Rick, thank you so much.
Oh, thank
Let's
you.
make this.
I have to run, but this was wonderful.
Yeah.
Bows to everyone.
Yeah.
Particularly
Been
you,
a great
Jeremy.
conversation.
Thank you. We're going to connect more, Jeremy. This
Yeah.
was great.
That's
We're gonna
wonderful.
connect.
Thank you, Rick.
All right, bows.
Okay, bye.
Fight the good fight. Keep on
Yeah.
rocking in the free world. Okay.
All
good.
right. Okay.
See you all.